Karen came to the house. She's very upset. This is no good. You gotta straighten this thing.
There are movies you watch, and then there are movies that rearrange something in your brain permanently. Goodfellas is the second kind. Released on September 19th, 1990, Martin Scorsese's crime epic didn't just tell the story of Henry Hill. It put you inside his skin, made you feel the thrill, the paranoia, the slow rot of a life built on violence and loyalty that was never really loyalty at all. The film is based on Nicholas Pileggi's 1986 nonfiction book Wise Guy, which itself drew from years of direct interviews with Hill after he entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. Pileggi and Scorsese co-wrote the screenplay together, and Scorsese has said he read the book and immediately called Pileggi to say he'd been waiting his whole life to make this film. Ray Liotta plays Henry Hill. Robert De Niro plays Jimmy Conway, the man with the warmest smile and the coldest calculations. Joe Pesci plays Tommy DeVito, a character so volatile he seems to exist in a permanent state of deciding whether to laugh or kill someone. And Lorraine Bracco plays Karen Hill, whose narration is one of the most underrated elements of the entire picture. A woman who looked at organized crime and saw glamour before she saw the grave. The film runs 2 hours and 26 minutes, received 6 Academy Award nominations, and is today ranked among the greatest films ever made by virtually every serious critical institution that has ever put a list together. But beneath the surface of what you've already seen and heard about Goodfellas, there's a layer of stories, from the set, from the research, from the real people involved, that most people never dig into. Today, we're going through 15 of them. Stick around for number 1, because it involves a real murder trial, a sitting judge, and the movie itself being used as evidence. Let's go. Martin Scorsese was not the first filmmaker attached to this project, and for a brief period, he almost wasn't the one who made it at all. After Nicholas Pileggi's book Wise Guy was published in 1986, Warner Brothers acquired the rights fairly quickly. The studio had initially circled other directors before Scorsese came into the picture. What sealed it wasn't a pitch meeting or a reel. Scorsese called Pileggi directly after reading the book. According to Pileggi in multiple interviews over the years, Scorsese told him, "I've been waiting for this book my whole life." Pileggi's response was that he'd been waiting for Scorsese his whole life. That mutual recognition turned into a creative partnership that produced the screenplay in a matter of months, which is unusually fast for an adaptation of this complexity. The two would later collaborate again on Casino in 1995, but the road wasn't entirely smooth. Scorsese was coming off The Last Temptation of Christ in 1988, which had generated death threats and a full-scale public controversy. Certain studio executives were cautious about backing another Scorsese project that might detonate in their faces. Warner Brothers ultimately committed, but the budget was tight relative to what the film scale would eventually demand. Scorsese shot in roughly 50 days, a compressed schedule for a film with this many locations, period details, and practical sequences. The film that almost belonged to someone else became the definitive entry in its director's career. The production brought Henry Hill on as a paid consultant, which gave the filmmakers direct access to the source. According to Pileggi, Hill was enthusiastic, cooperative, and genuinely delighted by the process. He was paid a consulting fee that various sources have placed in the low 6 figures, though the exact figure was never publicly confirmed. Hill later told interviewers that he considered the finished film about 95% accurate, which he offered as a compliment, and which most viewers receive as a fairly alarming statement given the content of the film. But here's the detail that gets overlooked. Hill occasionally tried to soften certain moments or redirect scenes to make himself look better, and Scorsese and Pileggi pushed back. The film was not interested in Henry Hill's preferred self-image. It was interested in what actually happened. One of the more documented examples involves the air of casual violence that surrounds Henry from early in the picture. Hill reportedly felt that some scenes made him look more brutal than he was, and he'd suggest to the crew that things happened differently, more reasonably, less viciously. The filmmakers listened politely, and then shot the more accurate version. The result is a Henry Hill who is charming enough to follow for 2.5 hours, but honest enough that you don't miss the rot underneath. Ray Liotta's path to playing Henry Hill is one of the more quietly determined casting stories in Hollywood history. Scorsese had seen Liotta's work, particularly his performance as Ray Sinclair in Jonathan Demme's Something Wild in 1986. The performance was explosive, frightening, and completely unhinged in exactly the ways that made Scorsese interested in Liotta as an actor. The problem was that Scorsese worried that same energy, so raw, so aggressive, might not fit Henry Hill, who needed to carry charm alongside menace. Henry Hill is a man you want to follow. Ray Sinclair was a man you want to escape. The two men ended up at the same hotel during the Venice Film Festival in 1988. Scorsese was there for the premiere of The Last Temptation of Christ and had a security detail around him at all times given the ongoing public controversy over the film. Liotta spotted Scorsese across the hotel lobby and moved toward him. A bodyguard stepped in front of him immediately and stopped him cold. Liotta, by his own account in interviews, didn't make a scene. He didn't push back. He simply acknowledged it, made brief eye contact with Scorsese across the room, and let it go. They found time to speak later. Scorsese later said that moment in the lobby told him everything he needed to know. The stillness, the ability to absorb a hard stop and wait for the next opening. That was Henry Hill, not Ray Sinclair. The concern about charm versus aggression resolved itself without a single line of audition dialogue. Lorraine Bracco's Karen Hill is one of the most fully realized supporting characters in the film, a woman whose narration gives us a view of mob life from the inside that no male perspective in the movie could provide. Bracco received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress for the role. The real Karen Hill cooperated with the production to a degree. She had originally been a source for Pileggi's book, and her perspective shaped significant portions of the screenplay. But the film's version of Karen is not entirely comfortable viewing if you're the person it's based on. Karen Hill has spoken in subsequent years about watching herself portrayed making choices that, from the outside, look difficult to defend, staying in the marriage, hiding the gun, turning a blind eye to things that were directly dangerous to her and her children. Bracco and the filmmakers have both acknowledged that they tried to portray Karen not as naive, but as someone genuinely seduced by a world that offered things, excitement, money, status, before it started taking them away. Bracco has said in interviews that she spent considerable time with Pileggi's material, trying to understand Karen's internal logic, rather than judging it. That approach is what makes the character work. You may not agree with Karen Hill's decisions, but you understand exactly how she arrived at each one. The Copacabana sequence, one unbroken shot following Henry and Karen through the back entrance, down through the kitchen, and into the main room as the table appears from nowhere, is among the most studied single shots in American cinema. It looks effortless. It was the opposite of effortless. Scorsese's original intention was to route the shot through an adjacent hallway that would have shortened the path and simplified the logistics. The building next door refused access. The owners were in the middle of an ongoing dispute with the Copa's management, and no amount of studio persuasion was going to open that hallway for a film crew. So Scorsese rebuilt the entire sequence through the back entrance instead, which meant more ground to cover, more personnel to coordinate, and a far longer tracking window for camera operator David Dunlap, who walked backward through the entire sequence with a Steadicam while actors hit their marks in real time. The shot required 8 takes. Every failure meant resetting everything, repositioning staff, resetting props, clearing the path through the kitchen. The final take, take 8, is the one in the film. What makes the shot narratively functional, not just technically impressive, is what it communicates without dialogue. You understand Henry Hill's position in the world entirely from the way that world rearranges itself around him. He doesn't use the front door. He doesn't wait in line. He moves through walls as if they were designed specifically to let him pass. 2 landlords in a property dispute accidentally handed cinema history one of its defining images. The scene where Tommy turns a casual compliment into a table-silencing confrontation, the How Am I Funny sequence, is the one moment in the film that most people remember first, longest, and most viscerally. It is based on something that actually happened to Joe Pesci. When Pesci was younger and working as a waiter, he told a customer who was known to be connected to organized crime that he was funny. He meant it entirely as a compliment and delivered it as one. The customer did not receive it that way. The man looked directly at him and turned the words around. How am I funny? Not with anger, exactly, with a kind of weighted stillness that made the air in the room change. Pesci never forgot it. He brought the story to Scorsese during the rehearsal period, and Scorsese recognized immediately what it had. He and Pesci workshopped the exchange, the rhythm of it, the escalation, the way it could go from casual to genuinely threatening without anyone raising their voice. And then Scorsese wrote it into the script. And then he deliberately didn't tell most of the cast exactly where it was going. The nervous laughter you see around that table is largely genuine. The sideways glances, the physical discomfort, actors who weren't entirely sure how far Pesci was going to push it, and who responded to the uncertainty the way real people would, by going very, very still. Scorsese kept every frame of it. The scene runs about 2 minutes. It has lived in the cultural memory for 35 years and counting. Most actors doing research for a role will read the source material, perhaps interview people connected to the story, and build from there. Robert De Niro's approach to research is somewhat more comprehensive than that. The production gave the cast direct access to Henry Hill as a consultant, which for De Niro apparently translated into a near-daily phone relationship at the height of his preparation. By Hill's own account in subsequent interviews, De Niro was calling him as many as 8 times a day during peak research periods. What's striking is what De Niro was asking about. Not the dramatic moments, not the heists, not the violence, not the big narrative turning points that would have obvious screen value. De Niro wanted the granular, specific, almost absurd details of how Jimmy Conway moved through the world, how he held a cigarette, the exact way he might pass out cash, the precise gesture he'd used to tap a bottle before pouring from it, whether he put ketchup on specific foods, and how he applied it. De Niro wanted condiment accuracy. He was not going to leave condiment accuracy to chance. Hill later said he found the calls both flattering and slightly overwhelming, but that he answered everything, and that the obsession paid off in ways visible on screen. Every casual gesture De Niro makes as Jimmy Conway carries the weight of someone who had the real movements described to him in granular detail, then practiced them until they became unconscious. It is arguably the most thorough preparation for a supporting role in the history of the production. Standard film production uses prop money. It has for decades. Prop money looks convincing on camera, costs a fraction of real currency, and involves zero risk of anything going wrong in the way that real money at the center of a production set could go wrong. Robert De Niro did not want to work with prop money for the scenes where Jimmy Conway distributes cash, the relaxed, almost bored way he peels off bills and hands them to people. De Niro felt that prop currency didn't have the right weight, the right feel, the right way of moving in his hand. Real money behaves differently. He wanted real money. The production had a problem. The prop master's solution was personal. He went to his own bank, withdrew $5,000 of his own savings, and brought it to set. Every single take involving the cash immediately became the most carefully managed moment on the entire production. After each take, production assistants fanned out across the set and collected every bill. All of it. Counted twice. No one moved. No one packed up. No one went anywhere until the full amount was confirmed and accounted for. It was less movie magic than a very tense accounting exercise conducted under film lights. The prop master got his money back. De Niro got what he needed, and the scenes have a tactile, unhurried quality that would be nearly impossible to manufacture with imitation bills. The scene late in the film where Henry and Karen Hill sit across from a federal prosecutor negotiating their entry into witness protection is one of the most grounded sequences in the picture. It has a different texture from everything around it, quieter, more procedural, less stylized. Part of the reason is that the man sitting across from Liotta and Bracco was not an actor. Edward McDonald was the actual United States attorney who handled Henry Hill's case, negotiated his cooperation deal, and processed his family's entry into the witness protection program. The production sent a crew member to photograph McDonald's office for set dressing purposes. McDonald grew suspicious that he'd never see his personal items again, asked who had been cast in his role, and, learning no one had yet been confirmed, volunteered himself. Scorsese's screen test was unconventional. He had Liotta and Bracco fire impromptu, unscripted questions at McDonald, and watched how he handled them. McDonald answered everything, in his own words, without hesitation. Scorsese said he watched for a few minutes and told McDonald he'd be hearing from them. The line that most people remember from the scene, McDonald telling Karen Hill to drop the babe in the woods routine, was not in the script. It came out during one of 6 takes on the day. Scorsese kept it. McDonald later said he'd probably only used that phrase once in his actual career, but the delivery on camera landed so naturally that it felt like he'd said it 1,000 times. Hollywood spends millions constructing the appearance of authenticity. Scorsese just called the man who was actually in the room. Spider is a minor character by the standards of the film's runtime, a young runner for the crew, mostly fetching drinks and staying out of the way of people who could rearrange his face without much consideration. He fails to stay quite invisible enough, and Tommy shoots him. Twice. The second time because Spider had the audacity to respond to the first. Michael Imperioli, who plays Spider, wanted to do the fall himself. A stunt double was available. Imperioli declined it. The prop department was supposed to give him a breakaway sugar glass, the standard issue, actor-friendly variety that shatters without injury. They handed him a real drinking glass instead. When Imperioli hit the bar and went down on camera, the real glass shattered and opened 2 of his fingers. He looked up from the floor, bleeding, covered in stage blood and 3 squib-triggered artificial bullet wounds, and found himself being driven by a production assistant to the nearest emergency room in Queens. The hospital staff, confronted with a man who appeared to have been shot multiple times and was soaked in blood, went immediately into trauma response. Imperioli tried to explain that he was an actor, that he'd been filming with Robert De Niro, that the bullet wounds were fake. This is precisely the kind of thing a person in severe shock might say, and the medical team treated his explanation accordingly. It took cutting his shirt open and finding the wires and squibs underneath before the situation clarified. No gunshot wounds. 2 cut fingers requiring stitches. The hospital, at this point, sent him back to the waiting room. Imperioli waited, got his stitches, and went back to set. Imperioli has described the whole episode in interviews, with what sounds like equal parts frustration and pride. What is now considered one of the greatest films ever made by critics, institutions, and film historians, the American Film Institute placed it on their 100 Greatest American Films list, and it has an approval rating approaching 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. Once caused a significant portion of a test audience to physically leave the building.